Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I'm so pleased that my guest today is my friend, the former Congressman from Massachusetts, Barney Frank, who proved once again that politics can be a noble profession. Welcome.
Thank you, Ronnie.
You've always been interested in politics, right? From the time you were a kid.
Yeah, I remember my father was what we would now call an early adopter. And he bought a TV set when I was born in 1940. There weren't many programs.
Oh boy, and how?
Yeah, no, I remember, my mother told me the NBC used to send out a postcard once a week with the programs, and if there was a change, you got a phone call. Because
amazing.
And so I do remember in the, one of my earliest memories, I was 10 years old. It was both, well, it was sort of crime, but that became an entry into politics. It was the Kefauver hearings. Estes Kefauver, which was kind of reproduced in The Godfather.
Right.
People have seen the scene in The Godfather of the
I remember
indignant
when
senators.
that was on television.
And I was 10 years old watching
riveting, right?
Estes Kefauver in that hearing, and I didn't fully understand it. I can still remember it, but it was fascinating. It was all about the mafia, but it was politics. And I do remember being very interested in the 1952 presidential election for Ray Stevens, having a strong rooting interest. My older sister, Ann Lewis, who was herself very prominent politically, Bill Clinton's press secretary, 2 years older than I, was out campaigning for Stevenson in '52, and that drew me into it. So from really the 1950 on, I just got more and more knowledgeable about as well as interested in politics.
And then the Army McCarthy hearings.
Army McCarthy hearings, I would run home from school to watch Joe Welsh and Army McCarthy, and by then I fully, no, not fully, but I pretty much understood it, and that was very important.
And that's, you say in a way, in this wonderful book, that was a period when you knew you really wanted to go into the government.
Well, I realized I realized when I was 13 that I was gay, but I also, by the time I was 14, said, gee, I'd like to do that. I knew I'd be good at it. We're all a mix of
you
good
like
and
to
bad
talk
things.
and
Yeah, I've been in a lifelong war with physical objects. I break things. I use too much force, or I do them wrong. I'm left-handed, so I do them the wrong way. I almost failed shop. Finally, the shop teacher said, well, you just sit there. And I said, okay. That'll be fine with me. But I knew I was good orally, verbally. I was good with words. I could make people laugh. I was kind of quick-witted. I had a natural bent for argument. So I'm watching the Army McCarthy hearings, and I know it's about important things, people's freedom from being abused. And I said, yeah, I'm good at that. I'd like to do that because, look, to be honest, we all like to do things we're good at.
Right.
You know, first of all, you're better at them, and then you enjoy them, and it's a mutually reinforcing virtuous cycle. So the Army McCarthy hearings were fascinating to me, but they were also conflicting. Because as I thought, gee, I'd like to do that, I also realized that being gay, homosexual, as we then call it to ourselves, if not fag, I mean, that was, it was an era when homosexuality was just
very
totally outrageous to people. It's kind of like realizing that you were someone that you were necrophiliac. I mean, I can't overemphasize the extent to which it was wholly unacceptable for society. I was an example of what everybody considered to be a terrible person, and there wasn't anything to do about it except to keep it a big secret. And I knew at the time, well, gee, I'd love to be in government, but you got to be popular to be in government. And I'm a member of the most unpopular group in America. So I figured, well, the unpopularity of my sexual orientation would keep me from ever being in government.
It's incredible, huh?
And in the Army,
you lived with that, and you lived with that for how many years?
Well, I did not begin to tell people that I was gay, other than furtive efforts to have sex with a person, until into my 30s. I didn't tell anybody voluntarily until my mid-30s, when I decided at that point, I'd been in the legislature, that being totally closeted, repressing myself that much was I couldn't live that way. So I began to come out on a kind of a retail basis to family and close friends in the late 70s.
Before you went to Congress, yeah.
Well, yeah, actually, I was in the process, 78, 79, of telling people. I'd been in the legislature by that time for 6
And
or
before
7
you went
years.
into the legislature, though, you worked for a candidate who then became mayor.
I worked for a man named Kevin White, who was running for mayor of Boston in 1967 against a terrible racist. And he was the hope to defeat her. And I went to work for him mainly out of a negative reaction to her. Her name was Louisa Hicks, not because I was enamored of him. I didn't know him well. But I soon came to think he was very good. He was the first mayor in the history of Boston to open up to the African American community. He later on went to be one of the pioneers in stopping highway construction through the city and pushing for public transportation instead. So I was very...
It was during the Lindsay era, too, for New
Yeah, he
Yorkers.
came...
Yeah.
Lindsay got elected in 65. There was this wave of mayors. In 1967, in fact, the year he got elected, the same day Carl Stokes became the first black mayor of Cleveland. Joe Alioto became a kind of innovative mayor of San Francisco. The three of them were kind of a trio of advocates. So I worked for him for 3 years. But again, I worked for him, and I was totally closeted. I mean, I lived in total fear that anybody would.
But at the same time, you were really successful.
Well, that really became an issue. You know, one of the things that I warned people against believing is this argument, oh, well, and it's not happening as much anymore because people aren't as closeted, but people can think of successful politicians who were generally assumed to be gay or lesbian. And the explanation was, well, you know what? He has got such a great career, he doesn't need a private life. The argument would be that all the,
Too busy going to everything.
the benefits of the public life, the nachas in Yiddish of being a great public figure, that compensated for having no private life. I found that to be almost not only untrue, but almost exactly the opposite. What I found in my own case was the greater the disparity between the public career I was getting, which was a successful one, and which I got a lot of praise, including, by the way, for being a gay rights advocate. Because when I decided I would run for office, after being with the mayor and getting some prominence, so I could then run for a lower state legislative entry-level position in a small area where being unusual, not gay explicitly, was not a problem in downtown Boston. But I did say to myself, literally, okay, I can't be honest about being gay, but I will be a gay rights advocate. I could not live with being a hypocrite about it. And I've felt ever since, nobody has to come out, but the right to privacy is not a right to hypocrisy.
Boston had a woman, Elaine Noble, right?
Yes.
She ran as an openly...
She got elected
as
2
an
years
open
after
lesbian.
me. I'd met her through my sister. I mentioned my sister, Ann Lewis. Ann was kind of a pioneer in women's political
Ann
activity,
Lewis,
as you were.
totally.
And she was one of the founders of the National Women's Political Caucus. And in May, and she was a co-chair in Massachusetts in 70 of the National Women's Political Caucus, or 71. And they had three co-chairs, an African-American woman, Lena Saunders, who lived in public housing, my sister, the married mother of three, and Elaine Noble, the lesbian. That was the kind of the coalition. So she introduced me to Elaine, and that was, although I was closeted to her, she was out. I got elected in 72. She got elected 2 years later. She was the first person in America to get elected in a partisan election to a major job. She served 4 years, and she got squeezed out when they changed the districts. But I found I was the advocate for gay rights. I would go to gay rights celebrations and parades and parties, and there would be very nice things said about my advocacy, and everyone would have a good time in the political thing, and then it would morph into a party, and I went home alone. And the contrast between the public and the private, rather than the public success offsetting the private lack of success, the contrast exacerbated. You know, the old song, Saturday night is the loneliest night of the week. Well, that was my life.
That was something. So now, I mean, then you went to the state legislature and you went to Congress, and we all know what happened. Now, to be gay is fine. To be in the government or in Congress,
not so fine.
It's not so fine. Explain it.
Yeah, as I said, in 2012, my last year in office, I got married. Jim and I had been talking about getting married. We'd been dating, living together for a while when I was not, I had my district that I was living in much of the time in Washington, but we were spending as much time as we
And
could.
totally accepted in Washington, right? Almost.
Well, Washington,
Almost totally.
If you're not too out, yeah, Washington has been a gay tolerance community for a long time, probably because Washington is a place where you are not at a disadvantage if you're not a member of a traditional nuclear family, because a whole lot of, remember the white people now, not the large African-American community, but the white and the black community that's involved in government, it's all full of people who are there temporarily and part-time. So having men there without their families is very common in Washington. And also, in defense of the federal government and politicians, there's this notion about patrons. The opposite is the case. The federal government has been a great source of hiring free of discrimination. It has been, for a long time, it was a place where the black middle class could go. Prince George's County, outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, was for a while, I think along with Queens, one of two counties in America where the median income of black people was higher than for white people.
Isn't that interesting?
Because you had a whole black middle class that could get hired by the federal
civil
government,
service, yeah.
which people couldn't get done because there was still too much prejudice. But in 2012, we made a point of saying, we wanted to get married while I was still in office. I wanted the Republicans on the whole who had voted to ban same-sex marriage to associate with the same-sex married couple, to show, no, you know what, this is, your fears are a lot of nonsense.
So this is where it all came together.
But then somebody had done a poll, because 2 years before that I had been the co-sponsor of the financial reform bill, named for myself and Senator Chris Dodd.
Dodd-Frank.
And it is literally the case that someone told me in 2012 that in the polling, my having married Jim was more approved by the voters than the financial reform bill. And that, what happened was, I think, as time went on, the prejudice against LGBT people, T came a little later, but we're finally getting there, diminished. And I think what happened was reality beat the prejudice. There was again a vicious cycle. We were closeted, so no one knew who we were, so all these stereotypes perpetuated. As people began to come out, the stereotypes just were so obviously inaccurate. And also what happened was this: people could hate them. And then as more and more of us began to come out, generally not publicly, who cared publicly, but to our friends and family and relatives and coworkers and students and teachers and customers, etc., people began to see us not as that terrible, oh, that's so-and-so, that's my cousin, that's my brother. And so we being gay became more and more socially acceptable. On the other hand, sadly, really beginning in the 70s, being in government became less and less acceptable. There was a demonization of government from a variety of sources. And as I said, I started out being afraid that being gay made me so unpopular I couldn't do anything as popular as government. And by the end, being gay was much more socially acceptable than being a congressman.
When did the government start to go down? Was it with
I believe it was in the
Gingrich?
70s. I think you go way back.
Reagan?
Vietnam,
Watergate.
and Watergate. It starts with that. It does go back up some.
That's when you and I met during
Yes,
Vietnam.
in 1965.
Yeah.
It goes back, well, there wasn't much anger, but the devaluation of government, you have Jimmy Ford and Jimmy Carter are decent men who mean well, but then Ronald Reagan comes in, and Reagan is not personally vituperative, but remember, Reagan, well, here's the difference. I guess I would say it happened, I can give you the 20-year period in which it seemed to happen. John Kennedy, in his inaugural, his most stirring, best-received line was, ask not what your country could do for you, ask what you could do for your country. That's a kind of a
That
collectivist.
touched us all, didn't it?
That's a pro-societal, let's act together. And how do we do that? Through government. When we want to do things together, we're doing through government. 20 years later, Ronald Reagan's key line from his inaugural, government is not the answer to our problem, government is the problem. That's
The beginning.
during that period. And I think what fuels it, though, is reality. And I think it starts in the 70s. I think OPEC has a lot to do with it. You come out of World War II, and America is the dominant economic power in the world to a degree that nobody else ever has been since Rome.
Right.
Because World War II devastated every major economy except ours, and ours it stimulated. World War II was terrible, people died. but America became the manufacturing center for the world. We made everything. Our economy grew. We got women began to work, and African Americans, not still with prejudice, but by the post-war period, from 45 until the mid-70s, America dominated the world. We made everything. Everything was done here. The rest of the world, we supplied them and got money for it. And so during that period, if you were a hard-working man, you didn't have the white guy, you weren't didn't face prejudice, and you want to work, you didn't have to have education or skills, you could go to an auto factory, a glass factory, a steel factory, et cetera, and make a very good living.
You also had veterans coming back who could go to college,
who had
got housing, everything, right.
Tremendously. Tip O'Neill used to lament that we created this whole middle class with government programs, and then the people who benefited turned
against it.
But that's exactly right. So for 30 years, white working class guys who were willing to work had a good chance. What happened was that was taken as the norm. It was an exceptional period due to Americans having done so well economically when the rest of the world was devastated. But in World War II, beginning at that point, OPEC was a part of it when they started to crunch, the position of white working class Americans began to erode because it began differentiating the economy. America no longer could make everything. We could make those things where high skills and high education were helpful, but where it was just basic work.
Well, when you say OPEC, what was the result?
Oil. The price of oil going up. I mean, that was one. All of a sudden, Americans had to pay more for oil. I mean, that was the first economic shock.
And it wasn't determined by us.
Yeah, remember, right, the oil companies got together and there was this significant shift upwards in the price of oil. That was like the first jolt that America, remember now Jimmy Carter and energy efficiency. The first energy efficiency, alternative energy, had nothing to do with climate or with the environment.
Oil.
It had mostly to do with the security needs to deal with the price of oil. But what happens is the terms of economic advance begin to turn, and so the high end does better, the lower end does worse, and you have this significant shift that gets worse and worse and worse, and it finally reaches the point where you have now a worldwide kind of revolt in advanced societies by a lot of voters against economic unfairness. And they're right that there is this economic unfairness. I think they're wrong about what happens. Because, you have it here. It's not just Donald Trump and people say, well, why isn't Hillary Clinton doing better? My counter is, frankly, of all the people who are major political figures today who have had significant governmental experience in the last 20 years, she's the only one still surviving. The Bushes got wiped out. David Cameron, Britain, Angela Merkel, Austria, Francois Hollande, the right-wing irrational popular taking over everywhere. And I do believe that the fundamental reason for it is real, that there has been this shift in the distribution economically, so that even as things got better overall, they either got worse or didn't get better nearly fast enough for a great bulk of people.
So this shift has created this division, this political division. But you always heard that Tip O'Neill and Reagan worked together well. On the other hand, there was Newt Gingrich, who really, didn't he start to?
Here's the deal. Reagan and O'Neill could work together, although I must tell you that O'Neill was kind of contemptuous of Reagan. I mean, he didn't think he knew very much, and he in particular was very critical of...
He was the Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
From Boston.
He was critical of Ronald Reagan because he said he's the guy who forgot where he came from. He was an Irishman who became kind of above it all. But still we worked together. But by the way, now it is true, Newt Gingrich begins this. People want to know where things started. There's a very good book by Norm Ornstein, which talks about how things started to go bad. Newt Gingrich set out in the late 80s, and he said, look, we'll never take over, we Republicans, if the Democrats are seen as decent people we disagree with. He began to demonize them. And it sowed the seeds. But even then, it didn't still take over in time. Remember, Gingrich had some short-term success, but he was forced out of office after 2 years as Speaker. He was repudiated. And from really through 2008, people said, well, the system is broken down and it's dysfunctional. Yeah, but only beginning in 2011, actually. During the Clinton years and the George W. Bush years, as well as the George H.W. Bush years and the Reagan years, people worked together.
Yeah,
there was
talked to each other,
cooperation.
yeah.
In 2008, I had become chairman of the Financial Services Committee, and we spent most of 2008. I wanted to be working on building affordable rental housing as opposed to selling poor people homes they couldn't afford. I wanted to work on this whole question of the distribution economically. Instead, we found ourselves fighting the fire of the financial crash. But the deal is, in 2008, George Bush sent his top economic advisors to a Democratic Congress and said, we got terrible problems, we think because of their lax regulatory policies, and we need help to bail them out. So we spent most of the election season of 2008 with the Democrats working with Bush to do things that later became very unpopular, ironically, which the Republicans then blamed on the Democrats. Everything, and by the way, during Bush's years, he got No Child Left Behind. I didn't like it, but he got it. He had bipartisan cooperation on the Iraq War. I wish he hadn't. There were some things I thought were wrong, but there was none of this vicious bipartisanship. And by the way, even under Gingrich, the Republicans cooperated more with Clinton. You've heard John Kasich during the primaries boast how he balanced the budget. Yeah, he balanced the budget, was chair of the Budget Committee, with President Bill Clinton. What happens is Obama takes over, and the Republicans decide they have to go into open warfare. And they made a clever realization that the Democrats are seen as the party of government. So that gave the Republicans, who were willing to do it, a political incentive to just trash government. They were kind of like Solomon in the temple. They could tear it down because it wasn't going to fall on their heads. It was going to fall on us. And beginning in 2009, the Republicans basically moved from being a conservative party that had views of what the government should do to being an oppositionist party whose main goal was to simply disable the government, knowing that the Democrats would then get blamed for it.
It's amazing, huh? What are we going to do?
Well, what I had been hoping was this, because I think, look, what needs to change is the Republican Party. We need to get back to Bob Dole, George H.W. Bush. I mean, when we had
moderate people.
Yeah, they were honest conservatives, but there were different views about what the role of government should be. Since 2009, and increasingly, and then after they won the congressional election, the Republican Party has been controlled by people who think that government should get screwed up. Ironically, that was fueled by the political reaction to the Democrats having supported the George Bush program for dealing with the crisis. Yeah. But the moderate, not even moderate Republicans, the mainstream conservative Republicans got beaten by Tea Party types. What we need to do is to have the Republican Party turn around. Now, frankly, I'd been hoping for a very big Hillary Clinton win, not just because I would like to see us have the control of the Congress, but I believe we're not going to get out of the dysfunction until the mainstream conservative Republicans take their party back from the extremists and the Trump people and the Tea Party people. And if Hillary does win, as I believe she will, and if we take back the Senate, I'm hoping that this is going to galvanize the more responsible conservative Republicans. I'm not talking about ideology, I'm talking about responsible conservative Republicans to take their party back. Until and unless they do, we're going to be in the same situation.
And it's not only in the federal government, I mean, it's the state levels where they've reapportioned all the districts, right?
No question, and they've done the gerrymandering in the House. Basically, we had bad luck. In 2000, I mean, the redistricting comes after the year that ends in zero. What that means is that the congressional elections, the elections of 2010, the off-year elections, put in power the people who are going to do the new districts in 2011 and 12, and they won them. Our next chance to do that is we got to hope that in 2020, the Democrats can do much better and take back some of those states and undo some of that. Some of that.
Not only the gerrymandering, all the voting restrictions and everything else.
Yeah, which the right-wing Supreme Court has allowed by striking the Voting Rights Act. Well, even there, they've been so egregious. Some judges have insisted on redoing that. But there's also this conservatism, not this conservatism, but the radicalization of the Republican Party. You're right. We said not just on the national level. Massachusetts, New York, we used to have There was Jacob Javits. There was Senator Ed Brooke.
We had Nelson Rockefeller.
Nelson Rockefeller. Congressman John Lindsay, a Republican. Congressman Bill Green, a Republican. They're gone. Even at the state levels now, the more conservative takeover of the Republican Party has been complete. And there is a almost uniformly right-wing take. Now, there are some Republicans who don't like their responsibility, but they've been intimidated. The fear of losing a primary.
That's something we need to, I wanted to discuss, is how sad it is to see some of the moderate Republicans betray themselves and what they believe by being this fear.
Yep. I give some of them, Richard Hanna from Ithaca just quit, a very reasonable, decent Republicans. I can't live this way. There are others. I think that was a major reason why Senator Olympia Snowe quit. But the problem is now they are more afraid of losing a primary. And I was asked in 2011 or whenever people have said, well, how come you guys can't get along better with the Republicans? And I said, well, let me ask you, how easy do you think it is to make a deal with Michelle Bachmann, who is one of the craziest of the Republicans? And the answer I got was, well, are you saying that all the Republicans are Michelle Bachmann? My answer was no. Only half of them are Michelle Bachmann, but the other half are afraid of losing a primary to Michelle Bachmann. By the way, a small piece of this blame goes to a guy who's generally been more responsible, John McCain, because he legitimized craziness with Sarah Palin.
Exactly.
The nomination of Sarah Palin to be the Vice President of the United States was such a shockingly irresponsible thing to do. I'm sure McCain now regrets it because he's unleashed this
whole thing,
totally destructive force. But that's where the problem is.
So we've come to the end of this program, and I know you come to New York often. Maybe you'll come back?
Absolutely.
Okay. And we didn't talk about this wonderful book. I mean, this book is funny. It's so informative. It tells you everything about the government, everything about
what I'm hoping
your struggle.
It's a manual in part for how to be an effective liberal.
Good.
I
want you to come back so I could ask you if you would run again. If you were a young person, would you run for office?
Oh, if I were a young person,
yeah.
Sure.
Thanks, Barney Frank. Thank you.
I'll be back in a month.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. We at CUNY TV always like to hear from our viewers. So if you have any subjects you'd like to explore or people you'd like to hear, please let us know. Write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or go to our website, cuny.tv, and click on Contact Us. We look forward to hearing from you.